Thank you, Dr. Kroll.
Go for it.
Thank you, Dr. Kroll, for giving me this opportunity. And I want to thank every one of you here for listening to this. All right. So Sherlock Holmes has once said that when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And I think that is the case for free will. Well, this is the topic of my essay and the source of my inspiration. So one day I was sitting there and I was watching the raindrop. It was snowing and raining, and I see a raindrop dropping right there, and I see, wow, is that random or non-random? But it suddenly occurred to me that in either case, the raindrop cannot have free will. So, I mean, this leads to a bigger project. So let's define free will first, because I think definition is very important. We have to have a uniform definition. I think this is a definition we can all agree on, is that free will is the ability to choose otherwise. So in any circumstance or under any particular situation or scenario, if you can choose otherwise, you have free will. In the entire universe, if one person, one entity, one existence can choose otherwise one time, I will say you have free will. But I don't think that is the case. And an event is defined as something that happens or doesn't happen. So if you go to school, go to a restaurant, or stay in bed, that's all event. If you don't do those things, it's also an event. Large objects curving space, that's an event. And an atom decaying, that's also an event. Everything that happens or not happen is an event. And that leads to 4 possibilities for an event to occur. So those would be the 4 attributes or nature of an event. And those 4 possibilities exhaust all metaphysical and logical possibilities. You cannot find any other possibility other than these 4 possibilities. So either an event is random, or an event is non-random, or an event is a mixture of both randomness and non-randomness, or that an event simply does not have an attribute. Let's define each one of them. If the event is random, then the event cannot be predicted with any degree of certainty other than 0. So by 0, it means that you have no ground, no epistemological basis to predict an event. So you simply don't know what is going to happen with certainty. If it's non-random, on this side of the logical extreme, then you know with 100% certainty of whether that event will occur or not. You know all the information about the event. If it is a mixture of both, then the event can be known with a degree of certainty between 0% and 100%. And it will be a mixture of randomness and non-randomness. So what would an example of that be? It would be, for example, quantum mechanics. And you see that on the micro scale, you can see the quantum mechanical wave function, and there's a pattern to it. But on the micro scale, you don't know what is going on, because every time the atom or electron decays is random. And in the case that the event does not have a property, it simply means that the event does not have an attribute, a property, or nature. And right now, we are going to exhaust all those possibilities. So our journey is to eliminate the impossible. If we can make sure that free will does not exist in all 4 categories, then we prove with definitive certainty that free will does not exist. So first of all, I reject this category because I argue that an event must have a nature. So what does a nature mean? A nature can include the attributes such as randomness or non-randomness. So an event being random or non-random is a nature. And randomness and non-randomness is defined as the ability to predict the future. And I argue that future must be able to be predicted, because here's the argument. If the event can be predicted partially or entirely, or not be predicted partially or entirely, then the event has a nature. And the second premise is that the event can be partially or entirely predicted. And therefore, the conclusion logically follows that an event has a nature. So any event in the universe or outside the universe or anywhere it is has a nature in terms of its attribute of randomness or non-randomness, because it can either be predicted or not predicted partially or entirely. So it is impossible to have free will in the false case. And now we talk about possibility A. So the possibility of non-randomness. Non-randomness. So non-randomness is defined as a perfect ability to predict the future. And we're going to look at possibility A first. So if the event is completely non-random, then by definition, then the event can be predicted with 100% certainty from any point in the past, present, or future, from any objective or subjective point of view. This means that the existence that is related to the event only has one possible state, can only have one possible state during the time that the event occurs. If there is only one possible state, then it would not be logically and metaphysically possible to choose otherwise for the entity or existence. Hence, the existence cannot have free will under this condition. And let's look at a point that we can all relate to. So it's like a road. A road has one path. So in your head, you think there can be multiple paths, but from an objective point of view, in the sense that from the standpoint of an objective reality, there can only be one possible course of action. So let's look at like this, right? If there's only one possible action, then regardless of how many roads those people have been through, they will end up getting married. Let's use the example of marriage. So they will all end up getting married. So regardless of how much drama there is, they will all end up getting married. Why? Because there's only one possible course of action in the time that the event occurs. So I can elaborate more, but I think that it is a convincing case to say that under the case of non-randomness, there cannot be free will. So these two, no free will. And let's look at possibility B. Possibility B is complete randomness. So the definition of complete randomness is that event cannot be predicted with any degree of certainty. So if the event cannot be predicted with any degree of certainty, then the event cannot be predicted with any degree of certainty from any objective or subjective standpoint. So that means that the entity that is going to act, so that includes human beings. So if you're a human being, if you're a person, and then you're going to act, and then that event which will relate to you occurs, then free will cannot happen. Why? Because the information that the existence has about future random events does and should not philosophically qualify as justified true belief or knowledge. Existence would simply not be able to choose because the logical and metaphysical possibilities of the future would be only and entirely necessitated by the capriciousness and unpredictable attribute of the nature of randomness. Imagine yourself in a certain situation, and the external factors are the same, the internal factors are the same, your thoughts are the same, your intention is the same, people around you are the same, your mood is the same, the level of sugar intake in the morning is the same, the cup of coffee you've drunk is the same. If everything is the same, and that happens to turn out in 100, 1,000, 1 billion, 1 trillion different ways, is that evidence of your free will? And I argue no. Why? Because you, as an agent in the case of randomness, simply will not know what is going to occur. Because what necessitates the process is the capriciousness and unpredictable attribute of randomness. So imagine yourself in that thought experiment, and you don't even know what is going on in the future, what will go on in the future. Because the future unfolds from this condition. Right now, 100 times, maybe there's randomness. Maybe if there's randomness, then it will occur differently. But it's not a testament for the existence of free will. Because everything is, the difference is entirely, 100%, can be explained by the capriciousness of randomness. We don't have an idea of what randomness is. We don't understand this concept because it is not part of our daily usage of language. That is why we attribute the term free will. But if you think it through, if you think that what actually produces the differences in the outcomes, then you would see it is not free will, it is the capriciousness of randomness. So if we add randomness to the picture, maybe they will get married, maybe they will not get married. So what will stay the same is that the drama inside their head will not disappear. But what will disappear is the result of them getting married or not. And that result is entirely necessitated by randomness. So maybe like those couples will just not get married. So there's no free will if the event is absolutely random. So random, no free will. Non-random, also no free will. And the difference between Peter Weinwagen's argument and my argument is that Peter Weinwagen treats, if I understand correctly, he treats determinism and indeterminism as mutually exclusive. But I don't think they are mutually exclusive. I think that randomness and non-randomness falls on a continuum. And by a continuum, it means that randomness and non-randomness do not exhaust all possibilities, logically and metaphysically. And now we'll look at a final possibility, which is that the event is a mixture of both A and B, of both randomness and non-randomness in terms of its nature or attribute or property. If the event has a mixture of randomness and non-randomness, meaning that the event only can be predicted from 0 to 100% certainty, excluding 0 and 100%, then some part of the event can be predicted and some part of the event cannot be predicted. To translate the confusing phrase, a mixture of randomness and non-randomness, one can imagine the process of introducing the capriciousness of randomness, which rejects free will's existence, into a non-random event, which also prohibits free will's existence. There is no reason for free will to magically arise from this process. So now do the thought experiment again. If Monica and Chandler, if you know those two characters, or whatever, like imagine a couple that is married right now. So if they're married right now, and that chance of marriage as an event is non-random, so meaning that it's 100%, it can be predicted from any point in the past, future, or present with 100% certainty. And then you start to introduce the element of randomness into it. So what will happen is that the event will contain a mixture of both, meaning that if they are going to get married 1 billion times, 1 trillion times, then maybe in 2 or 3 cases, if you just introduce a little bit of randomness, then the chance of them to get married, the certainty will fall a little bit. It will fall to here. If you introduce more randomness, it will also fall. But does the agent itself has the control in any particular case? No, because the event itself is entirely governed by randomness and non-randomness. So the event is entirely governed by randomness and non-randomness. Those are the only 2 factors that play a role here. So now the word will be very different, because usually when we see an event that it contains degrees of certainty and uncertainty, we really say that, okay, my free will can play into this. But this serves as a better explanation. Why? Because this explanation has greater explanatory power and is simpler. It has simplicity, it has explanatory power. But the language that we use in terms of free will is not simple. It involves a lot of complications, and it doesn't have explanatory power. Why doesn't free will have explanatory power? Because you have no idea what is going to occur. You have no idea about the certainty for an event to occur if you speak the language of free will. So if you really want to understand the universe, if you really want to understand what is going on about the nature of an event, you speak the language of randomness and non-randomness. And if you see that any event is in between 0 and 100%, and then you speak this language with great explanatory power, you will see that it is a mixture of both. So in all 3 possibilities that we have that have remained after we metaphysically reject neither, because the event must have a nature, this argument, then we can conclude that since possibilities A, B, and C exhaust all metaphysical possibilities, none of the possibility sanction the existence of free will, and free will is justified to be impossible to exist under any possibility. The existence of free will cannot be declared as impossible. And now what is going on in your mind probably includes that, oh, but I think the experience of free will is very strong. Oh, I think that maybe that time I made a choice. Oh, if I give up free will, I will give up more responsibility. But I have an answer to all those questions. So, okay, but I want to focus, right? So, let's not just use I mean, so just digress for 20 seconds. If you want to speak the language of personal experience, then in the past, people think that witches and witchcrafts actually real, and they burn them. And people who are burned think they are witches and witchcrafts. Are they really witches and witchcraft? They are not, because there are no witches and witchcrafts, right? It's just the delusion of experience. So, no free will in any possibility. Tell me, so if you want to say free will exists, right? And then, so do you acknowledge these are the only 4 possibilities? If you acknowledge that, then you think free will exists, you have to show me where does free will exist, right? Where? Where, in which category? Okay, so another Sherlock Holmes. I will end with this quote. So if you have eliminated the impossible, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, the non-existence of free will is the most improbable thing in the entire universe. Because when I was born, I think, I can make choices, But right now, I see myself as entirely determined. Not entirely, like so many things are determined, right? I used to think that I used to think, because when I was in high school, I was kind of short. I think that, maybe it's that I don't have a good discipline. That's why I'm short. But, later I find out, it's genetics and stuff. So right now, I finished with my presentation. I hope that I have elucidated the argument clearly, and I will be ready to take your questions. So but before that, is there anything you want to say, Dr. Kroll?
No, I'm just curious how the class reacts.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you. Okay, hi. Yeah.
Okay, so I agree with your point that an event, you can't really predict 100% the outcome of it. But where I'm kind of...
So predict with certainty.
Yeah, predict with certainty.
Yes.
I agree with that. But where I'm kind of having a problem with your argument is just the matter of making the decision itself rather than what outcome it will have, right? So if you have an intention, and with intention too, I'd say there's a certain free will involved in setting an intention because you're free to think, you could set the intention of whether you want to get married or not. But let's say even the intention itself is predetermined.
Mm-hmm.
You still have the decision whether you take path A versus path B in achieving the intention. So I agree that there are limitations of how that outcome will be, but within those limitations, I think there's kind of like the ability to choose which path you're able to take, and that itself, I believe, is like free will. Like I explained to you one of my civilization arguments.
Thank you for your question. So you are saying that because intention exists, so therefore free will does exist, right? Is that your argument?
If you have an ability to freely think,
Yeah.
thought,
Right.
you have the ability to act on that thought,
Uh-huh.
regardless of the limitations that are set by whatever society has set for you. I talked to you about how we're kind of operating under the confines of the system.
Right, I can answer your question right now. I perfectly understand your point.
Yeah.
So first of all, when you say that you can freely think, you make you use circular logic, because when you say freely think, you presuppose the existence of free will in the first place. Because if you have free will, then you freely think. If you don't have free will, you don't freely think. So if you say you freely think, you automatically assume you have free will. That's number one. Number two is that, and when you say that a thing like intention has free will, right? Now let me ask you. So is that contradictory to my system, or is that something that my system cannot explain? No, because intention is something that can be entirely falling under the category of randomness and non-randomness, because when an intention arises, it is either occurring or not occurring, because it is a random event or not a random event, or a mixture of both. So in any of 3 possibilities, an intention would not be able to have free will. So any point before the intention arises, after intention arises, during the time the intention arises, free will cannot exist. So intention brings a lot of complexities to the problem, and it creates a in my opinion, a delusion for free will. And I also share your argument that because intention exists, we are tricked to think that free will exists because we have this first personal narrative, and that is very strong, and that influences us enormously. But however, that if you look at the question with this theory, right, and then you ask what is the imperfection of this theory, what is the problem with this theory, and then if you don't have a definitive, if you agree with this system, right, then logically it is prudent to think free will doesn't exist. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Kind of. I'm still like having a little bit of a complication regarding like your certainty about how there's no free will behind intention.
Right. Excellent question. So the certainty, of course, we have to make assumptions when we do philosophy, when we do science, when we do anything. And without assumptions, then we cannot do anything. So my assumption is very simple. My assumption is logic. My assumption is the correctness of the definition. And the definition, whether it is, so two things I assume primarily, right? First is that whether they exhaust all logical possibilities or metaphysical possibilities. I think they exhaust all logical and metaphysical possibilities. There is nothing any other than those possibilities because there's any three categories other than the other two. They're mutually exclusive. So the negation of this would be the acknowledgement of any category under these three. So they're mutually exclusive. They entail all logical possibilities. And
So you think randomness and non-randomness are mutually exclusive?
no. So they are part of the continuum because randomness and non-randomness, right? They're logically dichotomous, and they fall on the two logical extreme. But they do not exhaust all logical possibilities. I'm saying that 1, 2, 3, right? So after we exhaust the metaphysical impossible case of being neither because the event must have a nature, then we look at these three possibilities, 1, 2, 3. And these two is logically and is the, the law of excluding middle is a negation of this one. These two, one of them is a negation of this one. And in any case, so you choose a point in the continuum. So when you say intention, right? So let me ask you, is your intention something that can be explained by the language of randomness or non-randomness? So when an intention occurs, it is either random, non-random, or a mixture of both. Any point it falls on this continuum, an intention cannot have free will. Okay, so we can text me or email me, whatever. Thank you for your question. It's an excellent question, very important questions. Go ahead, Maya.
My kind of goes in the same line of reasoning, just I wasn't thinking of it so much in the words of intention, so much as like the cause of where this event's coming from. But I can kind of grant like what you were saying before to move away from the like intention territory. But if free will is defined as the ability to choose otherwise in any act, and then say following the marriage example as well, it falls into the non-random category of 100% certainness. If it's going to happen, like say that the fiance says yes, but doesn't it hold that they could have said no? So then the event would have not been random. Like that's where I'm just kind of getting lost with like the equating of the choice to make the act and like the randomness to non-randomness measurement. Because if they could have said no to the proposal, then that says that they do have free will.
I think I partially understand it. Can you phrase your rejection in a proposition, please?
So the fact that they would have been able to respond to the proposal otherwise entails the fact that there is free will. I'm just not understanding where the events come from. Because sure, you can characterize them and say that all of them have a nature of entirely predicted or not predicted, but where are these events coming from? Because intuitively I disagree, and I do think that we do have causes. Like sure, sometimes it can be on the more random spectrum where there's less certainty that something is going to occur in the universe. But I think that there are like a lot of decision-making steps that can come to people creating the lives that they want for themselves, and like free will and choices are alongside that spectrum. I don't see why your argument can't, I think it's honestly more of an argument for free will than not for free will.
Okay, I'm confused.
Just to add on to that, like I would say
So, good question, fantastic question. So, in the case of randomness, you think so. If the marriage case, right? If Chandler and Monica get married, so I will not address any concern that is coming from the intuition, because we are two distinct bodies, and I don't have your experience, right? And but I can say that I also feel there's free will. Like my intuition feels there's free will, and I think all human beings more or less feel there's free will. And if we use intuition as an argument, then philosophy would be dead, because we can just settle all dispute with intuition. But however, philosophy still exists, and we still read so many academic journals. We read a lot of articles about free will, about ontology, about metaphysics and epistemology. And I think that is because intuition is not strong enough. It is not powerful enough to settle all philosophical dispute. And you said that my presentation is a case, again, for free will. And I mean, I don't really, I think like I have to disagree with that. So in the marriage case, if it's non-random, then there's only one possible cause of action, and then you cannot choose otherwise. In this case, you also cannot choose otherwise. You think you can? There's multiple possibilities. There is multiple possibilities, in a theoretical sense, or in terms of future. Like there are many possible future outcomes, but there's no choice involved. Why is there no choice involved? Because what is necessitating the thing to go this way or this way or this way is the capriciousness of randomness.
But that classification of capriciousness of randomness,
Mm-hmm.
I would rather define it as like the interlocking of multiple different factors that you analyze, from like your subconscious self to your daily life to other events to possible consequences. So I see what you're saying. I just would probably use that more as an argument for.
You can also say that. So what we are saying is not contradictory. You can make your argument that in that way, but that argument you have to make a convincing case as to how that supports the existence of free will. And so we can use many different approaches to solve a philosophical issue. The approach you use and the language you speak, in terms of using biochemical factors, psychological factors, physical factors, neurological factors, they can all be used to explain an event, the nature of an event. And I don't disagree with that approach. I think that's a fantastic approach. But I don't think that approach can allow us, with the modern technology and its limitation, to finally reach a conclusion that we can prove with definitive certainty that free will does not exist. However, I think with this approach, even it is a more confusing and abstract approach, I think that the conclusion it can allow us to reach is more certain. It's absolutely certain because it has a philosophical foundation. So I will be democratic. So Connor first, and then Dr. Kroll. Yeah. Thank you.
I agree with the two questions earlier. I think that your first quote was that when you get rid of the impossible, whatever you have left is the truth. However improbable it is. But I think the majority of your categories allow for the existence of free will. The only one that disallows it is the non-random, and the non-random disallows it by definition. You can't do otherwise because you can't do otherwise. So that's the way it is.
So
neither I don't really understand the category, and so I'll just say it's at least like prima facie.
So how does randomness allow free will? How?
I don't really understand. Mixture of both. Wherever you're getting between 1% and 99, I can say that the change in certainty, I can make a positive argument that that change in certainty comes from the existence of free will. And so this doesn't disallow for that. You see my point?
I absolutely see your point. I absolutely see your point.
And so it's not impossible.
Okay, I absolutely see your point. But as I said, so right now, we already analyzed the nature of randomness and non-randomness. So let me explain why we disagree here. The fact that we disagree. Let me phrase it in a better way. Okay. So you are saying what you are saying. I'm repeating what you're saying. You are saying that from the point, this is a point that we absolutely cannot have free will, and then we all agree on this foundation. And then let me start from this foundation. And you think that this point does not sanction free will. So if you acknowledge the existence of this category, you therefore acknowledge that event has a nature. If you acknowledge that event has a nature, then you also acknowledge that randomness is part of the nature of an event. And you think that what is driving an event to go from here to there or any point other than this point on this continuum is free will. And I think that is a point that can be logically, logically, you can make sense of it. However, I would argue that it causes a lot of complexities and inconsistency, actually. Because if you think that free will can suddenly occur in all these points other than this point, then there's an inconsistency. Why is there an inconsistency? Because if you just push yourself to this point, then your free will is suddenly annihilated. Isn't that strange? And in addition, if you argue free will exists, then it doesn't have much explanatory power. So as I explained in the previous point of the PPT, because the event seems to be entirely, so Connor, right? In this case, you're walking on the road and there are 4 possible course of actions. And in the case of complete randomness, my argument is very simple. You go on any of the paths, and that particular path you embark on is necessitated by the capriciousness of randomness, or by the unpredictable attribute of randomness. And then you are saying that you do it by free will, right? But I'm saying that